Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be talking about in-game cinematics or cutscenes. They have different definitions. A cutscene is pretty much when you're in the middle of a game and the camera cuts to something quick and then gets back to the game at play. Whereas a cinematic is usually between levels to where you're watching it more than playing it, and then the next level loads. You can use the names interchangeably if you want, but it's up to you. Either way, we're in Unity 4.3 and we're creating custom camera animations based on a key press, and the camera is going to fade in and out while showing us our footage inside of the game. So again, we're focusing on cinematics. So let's take a look at the setup we have so far. You'll notice the in-game view is on the left here, and the scene is on the right. So in our level, we just have a simple little room that we've built. It's just a couple cubes, it's nothing special. And we have our first-person controller who jumps in and runs around the level. Now you'll notice on the first-person controller we have this little arrow thing. We just named it Player Aimer. All it is a cylinder. There's nothing special about it, right? It's just a cylinder. The reason why we're doing that is so when we're playing the level, we can see which way this little cylinder guy is rotating, because as a cylinder, you can't really tell if it's rotating, or a capsule, I guess you would call this. And the reason why we want to know which way we're aiming is because when we're doing the cinematic, a very important part of cinematics are stopping the gameplay while the cinematic is being played. Because if you're playing a cinematic for anywhere from 5 seconds to a minute or whatnot, your player could have run off in who knows what direction. You could have been killed by the bad guys, you could have done any number of things. And there are tons of ways to stop the gameplay. In this example, we're focusing just on stopping the player, nothing else. So we don't have bad guys in our level or anything like that. We're just going to focus on the player, disabling the player movement so that you can't take any keyboard input and whatnot. So also we have a directional light just so you can see what we're doing. And we have this thing that we've named camera pivot, camera, and fader. So again, in our cinematic, our camera is going to fade in, show us some animation, and then fade out. So specifically what it's going to do is our camera is going to rotate around our level. Okay, nothing special, just a 360-degree rotation. So a camera doesn't really have a specific pivot, right? If you click on your camera, you can see that you have a pivot around the camera, and that's pretty much it. And pretty much everything in Unity has a center pivot. And there's not really much you can do in the editor. You have to do it all through code. So what we've done is we've created an empty game object that we've parented the camera to, and the empty game object is just located at 0, 0, 0, or in the center of our level. That way the camera can rotate 360 around it evenly, and the camera can just watch it. Now the fader, you'll notice it's parented under the camera, because no matter where the camera is, we want this little black box to follow it. And all this fader is a GUI texture. We just went to Game Object, Create Other, GUI Texture. Okay, so this GUI texture, we just added in a basic texture. It's this little black box here. Now you'll see that the black box is 256 pixels by 256 pixels. And what we're going to do is we're going to stretch that large enough to cover whatever screen size we need, which is very important nowadays with all the mobile development going on. Every phone has a completely different resolution. Every TV could possibly have a different resolution, and so forth and so on. The act of taking a smaller image and scaling it as needed and duplicating it as many times as needed has been used for years, and it's been used even in the website industry, where they would take one pixel and duplicate it 1,000,000 times, and that's the background color of your website. In essence, we could have made this 1 pixel by 1 pixel as well, but in game engines you need specific texture sizes, and 256 by 256 is a specific texture size. So we're just going with that because it makes it easier when doing texturing and whatnot. And again, so we just parented that to the camera, and it doesn't really matter where the X and Y pixel inset is or any of the other stuff, because we're going to be modifying that later on. Okay, so we're not going to be doing anything too crazy. I'm just showing you how to set everything up at the moment. We're not going to be doing custom animation. It's already going to be done for us just to show you. So again, we have our level set up. We have our camera set up with its own custom pivot and a fader attached to it. And we have our first person in there. And it's got a little stick on there so you can see, you know, what direction it's aiming, and we have our room. Okay, so let's take a look at the animation. When we created our animation, we selected the camera pivot, and we went to Window, Animation, and we created our own custom animation. You can see under the samples we're doing 30 frames per second, and at keyframe 0 here, let me open this up, we've where is it? The Y rotation. Okay, so we've got a keyframe on the Y rotation at 0, and you'll see here at 1 second it is at 71. Basically what we did is at 0 we did a 0 rotation, and then over here at 5 seconds we set it to 360. Okay, so for 5 seconds it's going to take 5 seconds to go one 360 degree loop. Okay, so that's just on the Y there. What else we've done, and we're not going to go through how to do animation in this video, we're just showing you what we've done. On that little fader object here, right, you can see that we've animated some things. So on that camera pivot, whenever you have a hierarchy inside of animation, a hierarchy like this, camera pivot, camera fader, you can add a curve to any of those things. You can see that we can do the camera pivot or the other stuff here. We can do stuff in the script, we can even do stuff on the camera, even on the fader that we've created, right? All these things. So on the fader GUI texture, color.A, A stands for alpha. That's where we get the fade. So you can see here, it's at 1, and then we go to 0 so we can see what we're doing. It watches the video, and then from 0 back to 1. Okay? And you'll notice here, the pixel height and width, we just set to gigantic. We just set it to 5,000. It's no big deal. The larger the number, it could affect processing, but in this example it really doesn't matter because it's this really small, solid black color texture. And there are ways to do it in code. We're just showing you how to do it with animation. Okay? So again, when you play it, it's just going to fade in, watch the animation of 360 degrees, and then it's going to fade out. Okay? It's nothing special, but it's a cinematic. Okay, so let's see. Again, in our pivot, we have the animation. We called it camera rotation 360. Okay, and we have our camera. There's nothing special on the camera. We have the fader, nothing special, just that black texture. Again, the light's no big deal. But on the first-person shooter, or the first-person controller here, so if you're going to disable the movement, you have to know what's going on in the code. So in the first-person controller, we've got all this stuff going on. Well, we have a character motor script, which is what makes the player go forward, backward, left, right, and jump. We have the mouse look script that does the mouse rotation as if you're looking around. We have the character controller that has all kinds of weird stuff based on what angle the character's moving and whatnot. And then we have the FPS controller that combines some of it. Some of it, but not all of it, right? It has 1 or 2 lines from the mouse look, and the rest is from the character motor script. So diving into those, it's kind of interesting how you would take somebody else's code and jump into it. So in this example, what we've done is we've taken the character motor script, and we're going to affect the can control variable that they've created. And basically, we're going to turn it on and off. So when the cinematic starts, we turn it off so no one can control it, and then when it's done, we turn it back on. The mouse look script did not have a variable like that we could really use. We could go into sensitivity X and set that to 0, and that way the mouse is not going to control it, and then set it back to 15. But just for a different type or a different method of getting variables out of this code, we're going to actually enable it and denable, or enable it to true and false, so that we can do it in a different way. So let's take a look at the code. I'm going to try to go side by side here. Let's see. So you can see that what we've first done is we created these 2 public variables. And what they're going to be for is they're going to be for the first-person shooter camera and the cinematic camera. And so the idea is that you can have hundreds of cameras in here that you can turn on and off and activate at will. So by creating these public variables, well, first off, we this code, the press to watch code, we just put all of it on this main camera pivot, okay? So when we dropped it on, you can see the script is press to watch, and then we have our two cameras here. So the FPS camera, we just came over here to the first person, and we dragged the main camera over. And then the cinematic camera is the one here that we created as well, and we're dragging that over. Okay, as simple as that. So then we created a variable. This variable is going to be so we can find the animation that we created. Okay? So what we did is, when the level started, right here, we took that variable and we said, okay, go find a game object called camera pivot. Okay? So again, you can see the camera pivot has this animation on it called camera rotation 360. And we did that so that we could use it later. Okay? Now, we also have a variable here that we're saying cinematic 1 set active to false. What this is doing is we're letting the person know in the code this video has not been watched yet. The animation that is on the camera pivot has not been watched. And the reason why we're doing that is because in a lot of games you only need to see something one time. So for example, let's say that you are running around in a level and you see a red door. And so when you open that door, it's going to show you an animation, or a cinematic, excuse me, of a monster popping out at you. So after you see it one time, you no longer need to see a video of a red door with a monster popping out of it when you open it. So you can set it to false so you don't have to watch it again whenever you hit that red door. Okay? Once you teach a player something, you shouldn't have to teach them repeatedly. So let's take a look. We also have these other two variables here. We have a public variable, camera motor, stop player movement, and game object, stop player look. So what exactly is happening? Well, let's look at our notes here. Again, the word public means you open up an editor slot, and we see them right here. But what is this character motor? Well, if you remember, there was a character motor JavaScript that was on the first-person controller. Okay? So what we're doing is we're saying, go find that code, the character motor script, and we're going to create a variable and call it stop player movement. That way, later on, we can reference that script. Okay? Now, again, the mouse look script we're doing slightly different. Okay? So in this case, we're going to grab the game object that has the script and put a variable there called stop player look. Okay? So let's take a look. On the stop player movement, which object, if you guys remember, had the character motor script? Well, it was the first-person controller, right? The first-person controller had the character motor script. So what we would do is we would grab that first-person controller and drag it over. So now the variable stop player movement has that script in it. So it can look inside that script. At the same time, for the stop player look as a game object, which game object had the mouse look script? The first-person controller. So again, we would drag that over. And you can see the difference here. One variable is looking inside code, the other variable is looking inside an object. So it's pretty cool. You can access variables in different ways. Okay, so let's take a look. Once the game has started, what are we going to look for constantly? Well, first up, we're going to look for if the player gives us any information in the form of a key button being pressed down, and specifically the E key. So when the E key is pressed, we're going to tell the player, the cinematic starts now. Get ready, we're going to watch it. Okay? And then, before the cinematic starts, we want to stop the player. So if you remember, the public character motor script, right, we're calling it stop player movement. So the stop player movement, we're looking for a variable called can control, which we showed you earlier in the first person script here, character motor, can control. It's a variable inside it. If you were to double click on the character motor script, you would see it. So we're going to set that to false, basically unchecking that box. So what about the mouse look so it doesn't rotate? Again, the first-person controller game object, we created a variable called stop player look. So, stop player look, we're going to get a component called mouse look. So let's take a look at that. First person controller, let's find our components, and here's the one called mouse look. And we're just going to say, is it enabled? No. Set it to false, so it's not enabled. You cannot look around, right? So when you press E, you're going to tell the player, hey, a cinematic is starting, and you're going to stop all the player movement. Okay? When the key is up, we're going to actually swap the cameras. So we were in first person mode. We don't want to be in first person mode anymore. So we're going to set the active to false. It's no longer active. The cinematic one is active. We want to watch the cinematic. So if we've already swapped cameras, what do we need to do next? We need to play the animation that is on that camera. So let's take a look at this. Cinematic 1 rotator, okay, that's going to be the object. If you remember, right, we created a variable for it up here. The game object, cinematic rotator, okay, we have that here. The cinematic rotator, we have all this stuff here, okay, and we have the camera pivot, right? Cinematic rotator is the camera pivot. Okay, so what does the dot animation mean? Well, the dot animation means look for the animation component on that camera pivot object. So camera pivot, here's our animation component, okay? And then play. Play what? Play the animation that is there. And in this case, it's the one that we created called Camera Rotation 360. It also has the fade on it as well. Okay? So when it plays, you'll see it fade in, rotate 360, and then fade out. So in Unity, Unity doesn't really have a when the animation is over code. So you have to look for it in a different way. What you have to do is you have to say, okay, this object here, that cinematic rotator, the animation, is it still playing, yes or no? And is it still playing this specific thing? So, yes or no, right? So what we're saying is if this object is no longer playing camera rotation 360. So is it still playing 360? False. It is not doing it. Okay? Then we're going to do this other code. But the interesting part is, again, if you're checking to make sure if a player has gone to that red door where the monster pops out again, you want to check that as well. So we're going to say, did you go to that red door? Yes or no? And also, are you done playing this animation? Okay? So if you remember, when the level first started, we have not gone to that red door, right? Hypothetically, right? The cinematic has not been played yet. It's false. But when the animation plays, okay, we're going to set it to true. Okay? So then, if it's true, which it is, and the animation is done being played, we're going to swap back into FPS mode. So we're going to set that camera to false, set the FPS camera back to true, and then of course we're stuck in our spot. We can't move. So we have to set these variables back to true as well. So again, we're going to dive back into the first person controller. We're going to dive back into the, what was it called again? Dive back into the character motor. And we're going to dive back into that can control variable and set it to true. And then on the mouse look, again, we're going to dive back into the first person controller. We're going to get the component, the script called mouse look, and we're going to enable it. Okay? So let's take a look real quick. So when we're playing our game, you can see in the editor that we are looking around, we're moving, we're jumping, we're moving, all these things. So again, we have that key button pressed to where when you press E, it fades in, it shows us the animation, and it fades back out. And then we can dive back in and start playing again. Now just in case you think I'm faking it, let's try it again, but listen up for me pressing the buttons. We start it, WASD, spacebar, mouse moving, nothing's happening. And now we can go back to it again. Okay? So, again, in your level, you're going to have your, your first person controller, your third person controller, whatever it may be. You're going to have your camera set up with all its animation and possibly a fader object, whatever it may be. And you can put the code wherever you want, it's up to you, but in this case we only had one camera doing one animation, so we just put all the code on that one camera object. So we created a slot for all the cameras in the level, and we looked for variables inside of the code to stop it. So again, in the beginning we created our public game object variables to add the cameras to. We created a variable for our animation, and we created a variable that referenced the character motor script and referenced the first person controller object as well. When the level started, we found the camera pivot object that had the animation, and we said, no, you have not seen the animation yet. As the player, you have not seen that red door open. Okay? Constantly, we were checking for when you pressed the E key. As soon as you pressed it, it said the cinematic starts now, which we forgot to show you. It is over here. You can see the cinematic starts now popped up in the console window to let us know it worked. And so when the E key was down, we stopped the player movement. Again, we took that variable from the first person controller, we looked for the variable called can control, and we set it to false. And then in the mouse look, right, we looked for that code and turned the enabled to false on that as well. So since the player could not move, when the E key went up, we swapped cameras and we played the animation on that camera. Then we checked, okay, well, if you've seen that video and it's done being played, it's set to false, swap the cameras back. Go back into FPS true, and then change those variables back to true so you can move again. So it's a very simple way to do a camera cinematic. As you build larger levels with larger games, it can get a lot more complicated, but this is at the most basic what you could do. You create an animation for the camera with whatever you want it to do, and you put the cameras where you want them, and you create the code that says swap from camera 1 to camera 2 and play the camera 2 animation. When the camera 2 animation is done, swap back to the camera 1 animation. And we did this based on a key press, but if you want in your level, you could do it based on hitting a trigger, loading level 5, whatever it may be, it's totally up to you. So have fun creating cinematics.